Hey guys, have you ever gotten a math word problem wrong? Or maybe you just really don't like math word problems? If you do or you are, then this video is probably going to be really helpful for you. So this is Mr. Kyle, Myers Mathematics, and let's just jump right into it. So today I want to talk about the tricks and tips for solving math word problems. And I've got two different kind of tricks and tips that I want to talk about. One is how to set them up, and two is how to solve them, right? Set up and solve, right? That's really what it kind of boils down to. A lot of people get tripped up on either one of those two things when it comes to word problems because, like, let's say, for instance, we had 3x plus 2 equals 8, right? So if that was your problem that you needed to solve, well, 3x plus 2 equals 8, I would subtract 2 on both sides, and then I would divide 3. So then I'd get x equals 2. So you can, check it if you want. But that's just an example, right? So if you have a problem, any kind of problem, it could be geometry, algebra 2, pre-calc, AP Calc PC, whatever it is. If it's just a regular problem, you can solve that as long as you have been doing okay in class. But then word problems come along, and a lot of people get stumped on them. You're not alone, by the way. So what's the difference? Well, the difference is all the words, right? So we have to make sense out of what's going on. We have to be able to set up an equation maybe, or be able to figure out what to do in order to give them what they want. So there are three things that really matter when it comes to math word problems as far as setting them up. So number one, what are the numbers in the problem? What are the numbers in the problem? Meaning like, twos, threes, pi, but also variables because they stand for numbers. So could be variables, could be numbers, or just math words like double the, product of blah, 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 like all that kind of stuff. But really numbers are going to be your big key thing that you're going to want to hone in on. So numbers, circle them, like just circle all the numbers, variables, that sort of thing. If there's already an equation given to you, or if they give you a graph and then they tell you things about the graph that are just in the graph for you to see, then that's not really important. A lot of times they'll do that. They'll try to give you all this context behind something, and then they'll just give you this equation, and it's like, well, I didn't have to read any of that because there's an equation here. So if that happens, don't be redundant and circle everything. Just, look at what's important and just circle what's important. Circle the numbers, variables, x and y, that sort of thing, and some math words. So that's number one. Number two would be the context. What do the numbers mean? So, for instance, if I said 2 could be a lot of things. It could be 2 feet. It could be 2 inches, yards. 2 cubic centimeters, could be volume. 2 feet per second. It could be a lot of things. So you got to know the context too, because that kind of has to deal with why it's a word problem in the first place, right? So you got to know the context behind the numbers, which is usually pretty easy because if you go like a couple words before and a couple words after that number, usually what that number means is either like a couple words before or a couple words after within that range. So just look at just a few words before the number and a few words after the number, and that'll tell you what it means usually. Like 99% of the time, because normally it's just, hey, 2 cubic centimeters, and it'll be right after that, and you'll be like, oh, okay, so this is volume, cubic centimeters, so I'm talking about volume here. So number one, numbers. Number two, context. Number three, what do they want? What are they asking? So that's important too, right? That one is usually pretty easy as well. You can usually find out what they want in the last sentence that's on the word problem. Sometimes second to last, but usually it's the last sentence, and usually there's like a question mark. Sometimes it'll just be like solve for x or something. But usually with word problems, it's a little bit more involved than that. They'll say like find out blah, 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 or something like that. So those sorts of words like find out or solve or something like that, those will key you in on the fact that they're asking you for something. But it's usually the last sentence. So number one, numbers. Number two, context. Number three, asking. Numbers, context, asking. Those are the three things that matter. If you can keep those in mind when you're going through the problem, and I highly recommend marking the text. It's not like a necessary thing, but it is helpful. I know like when you say marking the text, maybe if you really don't like English, that like kind of rubs you the wrong way. But it's helpful. It works. So if you're down for that, here's what I would recommend. Numbers, circle them. The context, what do the numbers mean? Underline that. And then what they're asking, put brackets on it. Like starting from, like let's say the last sentence is what they want, put a bracket at the start of that sentence and a bracket at the end of the sentence. Or maybe like highlight it if you have a highlighter or something like that. So circle the numbers, underline the context, bracket what they're asking, or put a box around the whole thing. And then that way it's really clear, because a lot of times these word problems, they have a lot of fluff. It'll be like, Johnny and Ashley are riding bikes together. Like, I don't care about Johnny and Ashley riding their bikes. I just want to solve this stupid math problem, right? So if there's like a first sentence and it has no numbers in it, and usually they're not going to ask you for what they want in the first sentence, right? So if the first sentence talks about Johnny and Ashley riding their bikes together, that doesn't matter. You don't have to worry about that. Like, skim over that and go straight to the numbers, the context, and what they're asking. Because it's going to have to do, like, what you're solving for is going to have to do with them riding their bikes or how fast or something like that. But it doesn't really matter unless it has numbers in it or letters. So if you can narrow it down to just the important stuff, get rid of all the fluff, it'll make it much less confusing, and then you'll be able to solve your math equation. Now, solving the math equation. So there's a ton of different ways to solve an equation. You can create a formula, an equation, right? That's usually what I like to do. That's kind of my favorite way to do it. Is I'm very straightforward, set up an equation and solve it. But doing it that way isn't always the best way to do it. So set up an equation and solve for it. That would be the first thing I would say. Like just the direct approach. And a lot of times that's the best way to do it, or it's, decent at least. But also plug-in methods. Plug-in methods are really useful. Like, for instance, let's say you're on a multiple choice question. You have A, B, C, and D. Then let's say A and B are 2 and 3, and then C and D are like 7 and 1.2. Well, if you plug in 2 and that doesn't work, plug in 3, that doesn't work, plug in 7, that didn't work, then D is the right answer. It has to be 1.2, right? You've narrowed it down. So sometimes it's actually easier to plug it in, because sometimes the equation that they give you to solve might be really complicated. Might have to like complete the square or something. But instead of doing that, if you just plug in those numbers, it actually is faster, because then you're just doing some quick maths, doing some PEMDAS stuff. And that would be easier than doing the whole completing the square nonsense. I mean, it's not terrible. I'm not like knocking on completing the square, but pretty much nobody likes it. It's like the worst kind of factoring there is. So if you can just plug it in, right? So then the last kind of thing to do would be to guesstimate. And that's the 3 that I have here. I have a 3 and 3. I just really like the number 3. And there's more than 3 ways to solve a problem. Obviously, there's like charts and tables, and set up a table, set up a t-chart, make a graph. There's all those things, of course, too. But the main 3 that I usually find are helpful are set up an equation to solve it, plug it in, and then the third one, guesstimate. Right? If you're feeling really bold, you can try to round to one significant figure, meaning like a number followed by a bunch of zeros, or 0.0005. But I would recommend guesstimating maybe to like 2 decimal places, especially if you're using a calculator. But if you're not using a calculator, guesstimation is really helpful, because just the numbers can get ridiculous sometimes. If there's a decimal or a fraction, make it easier. If it's like 1/7, make it 1/8 or 1/6. That'd be easier to do the math with, or something like that. Or let's say if it's 6/7, right? That's really close to 1. So just use 1 and see what happens. Now, this method is really helpful on multiple choice questions, but not if 2 answers are really close. So if you had like A is 2 and B is 3, and you got like 2.5 when you guesstimated, like, I don't know, that could be 2, it could be 3. Like, I don't know, did I round too high, too low? So you have to be careful with that method, but it's usually really helpful to get an idea. At the very least, I really like using guesstimating because what it does is it's like a self-check. If you guesstimate what the answer should be, and then you solve it, like actually solve it, and you get an answer, then it should be close to what you guesstimated. So like Pythagorean theorem, for instance, let's say you have a side of 3 and a side of 4, and you're solving for the hypotenuse. So if you kind of guesstimate, it's like, well, I'm going to be squaring them both and then taking the square root. So it's going to be like a bigger number than 3 and 4, but I'm going to be adding the square of 3 and the square of 4 and then taking the square root. So it shouldn't be like way higher than 3 and 4. It should be like a little bit bigger than 3 and 4, but not like too much higher. And then lo and behold, you take the, a squared plus b squared equals c squared, solve it, and you get 5. And then you're like, oh, okay, like that's not, it's a little bit bigger than 3 and 4. It should be, because the hypotenuse should be the biggest side, but it's not like a lot bigger than 3. So that answer makes sense. So you can guesstimate by just kind of thinking about it. You can also measure. Guesstimating by measuring is really helpful, especially on the SAT for geometry stuff. Super helpful, because what you can do little like tricks, like you can take your paper and fold it at a corner, like perfectly at a corner. It makes a 45-degree angle, and then you can measure things. And it's like, okay, if it's like exactly that much, then it's 45 degrees, roughly. If it's a little more, it might be like 60. A little less might be like 30. And then you can guesstimate doing it that way as well. And honestly, if you do that on the geometry, you can solve so many problems with doing very, very little actual math, because all of their stuff is mostly drawn to scale. So you can get a really good estimate just by measuring, by folding your paper and creasing it in half to get a 45-degree angle. And then also, if you put little tick marks on your paper, like fold your paper and then actually measure things on the picture that they have for the geometry and put little tick marks on it. And that way you know, hey, this segment is this long. So this X segment over here that I'm solving for, it looks like it's half that much. Well, that side was like 5, and that looks like that's half as much. So my answer should be like 2.5. And then, oh, B is 2.5. Oh, there you go. B is 2. It's B. So you can do stuff like that and just kind of hack the system a little bit, especially in geometry. Guesstimating is super helpful. And just like, if it looks like 90, it probably is 90 kind of thing. You have to be careful with some of that stuff. But those are my 3 things. So setting up a problem, to wrap all of this up here, setting up a problem, the numbers are important, the context, and what they want. What do they want? And then as far as solving strategies, the big 3, in my opinion, are set up an equation and solve it, plug it in, and guesstimate. Those are like the big 3, right? So I hope that's been helpful. If it has, go ahead and give this video a like. If you want to see more videos like this, go ahead and subscribe. I believe I'll have my letter M for my channel that you can click on and subscribe to the channel. I'm actually going to be doing a series on test prep. So this is the first video in a series on test prep. So stay tuned. And if you haven't subscribed already, I would highly recommend it if you're coming up on a test. I'm going to do like a 2-week series. It's going to be a video a day for 14 days that I've got set up. Just a bunch of good stuff in the works, like websites that are really helpful for studying, what to ask your teacher before the test, what to do the day before the test, the week coming up to the test, the 10 minutes before the test, during the test, some hacks for multiple choice problems, like how to really like hack the system, those sorts of things. So all of that is coming up in the works every day around this time, around 4 p.m. I'm going to try to put them out at 4 p.m., but we'll see. I'll schedule them at 4 p.m. But anyways, stay tuned for that. That's going to be super helpful. And speaking of things that are super helpful, I have another guide on why people miss math problems. And if you want to check that out, it is free. It's called The 5 Math Mistakes Everyone Makes and How to Avoid Them. So that's a free download on my website, myersmathematics.com. Same name as the channel with a .com on it. Go there and you can get that free guide for free. So I hope that's helpful as well. And let me know if you like it. And of course, if you want to see something specific, like one of those things I mentioned, and you want to see that before I put out something else, go ahead and just throw that in the comments. Let me know what you would want to see. And if you have some suggestions on test prep questions that you have, I'm actually going to have a whole video on like misnomers, just things that people think are true about test prep and multiple choice questions and things like that, but are actually not true, and what is true about what you can do about multiple choice questions. So if you want to see a certain video before another one, if you have a question about test prep in general, throw that in the comments below as well. And I will make that video come out before another one, because I know some of you guys that are in college years are coming up on your tests very soon, like in the next week, really soon. And then for high school, some places are doing tests at the end of the year, some places are not, but normally tests are coming up at the end of May, and this is May the 1st. We're rounding off the school year here, y'all. So go ahead and subscribe, like, and let me know in the comments below what you want to see next as far as test prep. And I will see you in another episode.